The sanctity of Torah, Kedushas Torah, is so great, as we'll see, that it's in the words, it's in the way we speak in Torah, it's in the thoughts we have in Torah, that for us, Kedusha is not only attached to a place, as in other faiths, you've got a temple, you've got a place of worship, and to things, the Sefer Torah, you've got objects of Kedusha. We've also got time of Kedusha, such as Shabbos and Yom Tov, and we've got thoughts of Kedusha and words of Kedusha, which we'll understand more deeply in the Avodah Zarah Daf Mem Daled Amud Beis, sanctity in thought and words, dvarim shel kodesh, asur lomram b'loshen chol. And we start with the Mishnah, which took place in Akko. Why? It's necessary for the Mishnah to tell us actually where it took place. It's interesting, and I'm not sure. But it was a particular Roman general, Proclus ben Philosophus, asked Rabbi Gamliel in Akko, while they were in the bathhouse. They were having a sauna in the bathhouses of Akko, and there was an image of Aphrodite there. It was a very beautiful bathhouse. So the Roman says to Rabbi Gamliel, "Katuv b'toratchem lo yidbak b'yadcha mu'uma min acherem," that you're not allowed to be attached in any way and have any benefit from Avodah Zarah. On the Mishnah Daf Mem Gimel, we learned from this pasuk that you're not allowed to have any benefit from Avodah Zarah. And here you are having a bath in front of the goddess Aphrodite. It just doesn't look right. So you see, he knew his psukim. What are you doing here? Omar lo, he said, Ein meshivim b'merchatz. I can't ask you in a bath. I can't answer you in a bathhouse. That would be getting into divrei Torah. We don't quote psukim in the bathhouse. We can't have this conversation now. And then he deals with it later. Ask the Gemara, V'hechi avid hachi. How did he even answer that? V'omar Rabbi Baba Chanam Rabbi Yochanan b'chol mokom mutar laharei chutz mi'beit hamerchatz v'beit hakiseh. That you're allowed to think about divrei Torah in all sorts of different places, except in the washrooms and in the bathhouses where people are standing around undressed. There you can't even think about Torah. So how does he even answer ein meshivin b'merchatz, which is a halacha? How is he giving him a din when in a place where you're not even allowed to be thinking in Torah? And if you say he said it in English, he didn't say it in Lashon HaKodesh or in Latin. Dvarim shel chol mutar lomram b'lashon kodesh. Dvarim shel kodesh also lomram b'lashon chol. When you're standing in one of these places, you're allowed to speak Hebrew. Isn't that interesting? You need a special heter to speak Hebrew in a bathhouse. Because even if you're discussing the news or you're discussing business, in Lashon HaKodesh, it's called Lashon HaKodesh. There's Kedusha in Hebrew no matter what you're saying. And there used to be a time when in the Hebrew language there were no foul words. I think now we've imported them in modern Hebrew language. We've imported some foul words from Arabic and other languages. But in Lashon HaKodesh itself, there are no foul words because it's Kodesh. The words themselves, when you're speaking Lashon Kodesh, there have been poskim who've said that to learn Hebrew on Shabbos is mutar, even to read a good Hebrew newspaper in order to improve your Hebrew. You're allowed to do on Shabbos because learning Hebrew is a mitzvah. It's something that it's not just another language. And every time you say a word of Lashon HaKodesh, every time you express yourself in Hebrew, you be mekayim a mitzvah. It's an unbelievable thought. And therefore, there's a heter. You can talk business in the bathhouse, even in Hebrew. Dvarim shel kodesh also lomram b'lashon chol, but you can't talk Torah in English or in Latin. So the content is what's important here. Says the Gemara, Tana kishiyatza amalo ein meshivim b'merchatz. You've got to understand the Mishnah that he only said this after they emerged from the bathhouse, not in the bathhouse. And Tosfos explains there are various different chambers in the bathhouse, and he said this in one of the chambers in which one could, but not in the actual bathhouse where everybody's standing around naked. There's an interesting Rashi, where Rashi says on the Hechi Avid Hachi, even though you're talking Torah in a foreign language, it's not Lashon HaKodesh, lo nafki mikdushatayu. The Kedushat HaTorah remains even when you're expressing it in a foreign language. It doesn't lose its Kedusha. The Kedusha is there. The Maharam asks a fascinating question. The Maharsha asks the same question, and that is, why do you have to bring a proof from Rabba Baba Chana Omer Rabbi Yochanan and from Abaya? Why do you have to bring these proofs? How could he have done it in the washroom? in the sauna, we've got this din from Rabbi Baba Chana. You've got a proof from Rabbi Gamliel himself. Rabbi Gamliel himself says you're not allowed to talk Torah in a bathhouse. So how did he do it? You don't need another proof. Rabbi Gamliel himself has taught us in the bathhouse that you're not allowed to talk Torah in the bathhouse. So that's the question itself. Okay, Rabbi Gamliel, we don't understand why you said it in the bathhouse, but you did teach it to us. And if you're not allowed to talk Torah in the bathhouse, how did you talk Torah in the bathhouse? That should have been the question. Answers the Maharam. I would have thought from Rabban Gamliel alone, all he said is Ein Meshivin b'merchat. He stated a halacha. De'eno elo kamo hirhur b'divrei Torah. And that's only like thinking in divrei Torah. And I might have thought that that's mutter. So I might have thought from Rabban Gamliel that Rabban Gamliel holds that just to state a halacha is not called Torah. Just to state a halacha is, it's maybe thinking about Torah, but it's not real Torah. And that's why we bring a proof from Rabbi Baba Chana that even to think in divrei Torah is forbidden in the bathhouse. And we'll see in a moment from Yoredea that the reason is because of Kovod HaTorah, that's not a respectful thing to do. That principle is from the Ran, our Ran over here. It's a very important Ran. ולהשיב בדבר אסור מותר, גם כן מותר בה שכל שאינו אומר עיקר טעמו של דבר אינו אלו כהרהור. If you're merely stating halacha, you're not learning Torah. When you're stating halacha, you're thinking in Torah at best. Your mind is involved in Torah. But that's not called limud Torah. There's a big difference between dinim and halacha. I call it often halacha with a small h and halacha with a capital H. Halacha with a small h is dinim. What's allowed, what isn't allowed. And that's not learning Torah. That's your manual. You need to know that stuff. But that's not learning Torah. Learning Torah is, you can't say you're a computer scientist because you read the manual for your computer. So now you're a computer scientist. No, you're not. You're an Amaharitz who knows how to operate the computer, and you've learned the instructions to operate the computer. When you're learning dinim and halachot, you're learning the manual. Do this, don't do this, do this, don't do that. That's not called Torah. That's not called learning Torah. At best, that's thinking about Torah. It's based on this run that the Maharam answers that I can't ask a question from Rabban Gamliel himself because all he did was say Ein Meshivin b'merchat. He just stated halacha. Stating halacha is not learning Torah, and I would have thought there's nothing wrong with that. And based on that, we've got the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Mem Zayin, Hamaharher b'divrei Torah eino tzarich levarech. When you get up early in the morning and you haven't yet said Birkat HaTorah, and your mind is on Torah, are you allowed to be thinking in Torah? So if I get up in the morning and before I've even said the Birkas HaTorah, I'm thinking about the shir, what are we going to do? And my mind is in Torah, am I allowed to do that? Says the Shulchan Aruch, yes. You don't need a brocha yet. Why? Says the Magen Avram, Dehirhur lav kedibur dami. Because we paskin that thinking and speaking are different. And learning Torah requires dibur. If you're not speaking, that's not learning Torah. If you're not talking it out, that's not learning Torah. Says the Ramah, and therefore, based on our run, interesting how Gemara in Avodah Zarah comes back to dinim in the doors of the Birkas HaTorah, of saying the blessing for learning. And therefore you can paskin a din, you can state a halacha, even without saying Birkas HaTorah in the morning. If you want to just learn the dinim, you just want to learn the laws, you may do this, you may not do this, you can do that, you don't even need a brocha for that. And if somebody asks a shaila, you can answer yes or no. You can answer permitted or not permitted in the morning. You don't need a brocha for that. And the origin for this is the run in Perik Kolat Slomim. It says, because of the Haviki here, yeah, the run says that it is like Hiru, but that's specifically with respect to the bathroom. Interestingly, as an aside, this affects in 3 days' time. We're going to be in Tisha B'Av. In Tisha B'Av, during Tisha B'Av, we're not allowed to learn Torah. Are we allowed to think in Torah? So the Shulchan Aruch Paskins in Taf Kuf Nun Dalet, Yesh Misha Oseh Lilmod Al Yedei Hiru. That there is an Isra even to learn by Hiru, even to be thinking in Torah, is also on Tisha B'Av. Says the Magen Avram, Af Agav de Hiru Lav Ki Dibur Dami, Asks the Magen Avram, we've just established that thinking, you don't even need a Birkas HaTorah for thinking in Torah. If you don't need a Birkas HaTorah for thinking in Torah, why can't you learn it? Why can't you do it on Tisha B'Av? Answers the Magen Avram, Shani Hachadi Katama Mishum Simcha. We're not talking about the mitzvah of learning Torah. It's not that on Tisha B'Av you can't do mitzvahs. You do mitzvahs all day on Tisha B'Av. The problem is the joy of learning Torah. And Uvehirur Ika Simcha. And you can enjoy learning even when you're thinking about it. So if we're talking about the mitzvah of limud Torah, that needs dibur. You've got to articulate it, not just think about it. If you're talking about the joy of learning Torah, that can come even from thinking about it. And therefore, says the Magen Avram, v'gam asur lahorot hora'ah im lo l'chole atzarich achshav. You're not paskening for a sick person. You can't even pasken the halacha. You can't even learn dinim. You can't tell somebody mutar or asur. Because what did we just learn in the run? That if you're saying that stating a halacha is like hirur. And we've just said that on Tisha B'Av, you're not allowed to think in Torah. So normally, hirur lav kedibur dami. Normally, you want to be mekayim, you want to fulfill the mitzvah of learning Torah, you've got to speak it out. If you just think about Torah, it's not learning Torah. And therefore, you can think about Torah before you've made a brocha in the morning. However, on Tisha B'Av, where you're not allowed to learn, you're not even allowed to think in Torah. Why? Because thinking in Torah provides joy. Can you pasken a halacha? So in the morning before Birkat Torah, you can pasken a halacha because that's not called learning. That's just giving information. That's not limud. That's informative. So can you give information on Tisha B'Av? No, because even giving information, if it's Torah information, your mind is involved in the thought process, and that brings joy, and you can't have that joy on Tisha B'Av. There's a beautiful Vilna Gaon back in Simon Mem Zayin on this din about being allowed to think in Torah even before you've made the bracha, the Birkas HaTorah. Says the Vilna Gaon in the third line, Aval kol zeh tzarich iyun, but one has to consider this. Dekan mevarech al ha-mitzvah. Yes, there are many situations where you need articulation. And when you need articulation, thought doesn't count. If you need articulation, you've got to say it. But when it comes to Torah, says the Vilna Gaon, a massive chidush. V'chilek mitzvah behirur. Is thinking in Torah not a mitzvah? And the bracha is a birkas ha-mitzvah. You're saying a bracha on the mitzvah. And surely thinking in Torah is a mitzvah. V'alo ne'emar v'higita bo yom v'layla. What does it say in Tanakh? It says you must think in Torah day and night. Ritzon olamar belev, kamo shekosav igyon libi. V'kol shchen lifsok din, and certainly if you're going to pasken halacha. So the mitzvah of v'higita bo yom v'layla, Hashem says, I want your mind to be occupied in my Torah thinking, in Torah methodology, in a Torah lens through which to view the world, in analyzing issues. I want your mind to be looking and thinking always from a Torah perspective. And that's a mitzvah. So when my mind is doing that, am I not fulfilling a mitzvah? Just reading psukim, you have to make a bracha. And if you're reading the Torah in public, you've got to make a bracha before you can do that. Even though there's no learning, it's just statement of facts. It's kind of informational. But since your mind is on it, you're being mekayim a mitzvah. In that case, we've got to go back to the Maharam because it doesn't work so well, the Maharam's answer on the Mishnah. Let's go back to the question. So why does the Gemara not ask from Rabban Gamliel himself? Rabban Gamliel says, Ein meshivin b'merchatz, that you're not allowed to answer in the merchatz. That's a statement of halacha. And a statement of halacha is like thinking in Torah. And thinking in Torah, says the Vilna Gaon, the Vilna Gaon paskins us the halacha that you do have to say a bracha before you think in Torah. That's how the Vilna Gaon holds. And in that case, in our Mishnah too, how could we even think that Rabban Gamliel is allowed to say it in the merchatz because he's just paskining halacha, and the Ran says paskining halacha, making a halachic decision, is like thinking in Torah, but not really like learning Torah. We see from the Vilna Gaon that thinking in Torah is the mitzvah. The mitzvah is thinking in Torah, so you can't think in Torah in the Bathhouse, as we see, in fact, further on. And Rabban Gamliel how does he do that? So we should be able to ask the question from Rabban Gamliel himself. The Maharam's answer doesn't work. The Maharshal gives a slightly different answer. But I want to suggest the following answer. If you look at the Rabban Gamliel's words, he doesn't say asur lahashiv b'merchatz. As later on it says, Rabbi Barchana Omer Rabbi Yochanan says what? There he says, you're allowed to think in Torah anywhere except in the Beis HaMerchaz, where you're not allowed to. And if you want to say that you're saying it in another language, that's mutar, but in Kodesh it's also, the words they use there is mutar and asur. The words that Rabban Gamliel uses in the bathhouse is ein meshivin b'merchatz. So I would suggest to you that Rabban Gamliel is not giving a halacha. He's talking about it inappropriate. It's just inappropriate. You don't talk about Torah in a bathhouse. It's not a halacha. You don't need the Torah to know that you don't talk about holy things in a bathhouse. You also shouldn't be, the Roman general, shouldn't be talking about your faith in the bathhouse either. It's not the place to be talking about God in the bathhouse. You don't need the Torah for that. That's just a derech eretz thing. And that, in fact, we see in the Shulchan Aruch, in Yoredei Reish Pei Beis, the Ramor says, Asur la'arei b'divrei Torah b'mkomotav metunafim, adds the Ramor, v'hu mishum kavod Torah. The reason that you can't think of Torah in these places is mishum kavod Torah. It's not dignified for Torah. To bring Torah, even in your mind, to bring Torah into those kinds of places, into those kinds of situations. That's not appropriate. It's not kavod Torah. So we see that he's saying, Ein meshivin b'merchatz is not a psak halacha. Ein meshivin b'merchatz is just a guidance in derech eretz and a way to be a civilized, normal human being, a decent human being. It's not divrei Torah. But the beautiful thing to see is, what does the Gemara conclude? The Gemara doesn't answer what I've just suggested. The Gemara doesn't say, he didn't say asur mutar, he just said Ein meshivin. What does the Gemara say? No, he said that after they got out. Why doesn't the Gemara answer what I've suggested? I thought my answer is such a good answer. Why does the Gemara think it's not? So we see from how the Gemara concludes is, there's a difference when a professor says, we don't do this, and when a posek says, we don't do this. There's a difference when a non-Jew, or when a secular person says, this is not a good thing to do, this is not the way to behave. And when a frum Jew says, this is not the way to behave. They come from different places. The words are the same. The superficial meaning is the same, but they come from a different place. When a non-Jewish person or a secular person says, it's not appropriate to do so, it comes from a place of derech eretz. It's an important place, there's nothing wrong with it. It comes from a place of derech, it's not appropriate. But when a Jew says, even just something's not appropriate, that comes from a place of Torah. Because we look at everything from a place of Torah. So when we look at something being appropriate or not, our source of knowledge is not the textbooks of courtesy and polite behavior. Our source is the Torah. So for a Rabban Gamliel to say Ein meshivin b'merchatz, even that he wouldn't have said in the bathhouse. The Havamina, initially we thought maybe he could have said it in the bathhouse because it's just derech eretz, it's not a psak halacha. The answer is for a Godel b'Torah, when a great Torah person says anything, it's always a psak halacha. You learn from everything. We learn from Sichas Chulin Shel Talmidei Chachomim. You learn from the day-to-day speech. If a Talmid Chacham is speaking about day-to-day matters, you learn halachot from the way he speaks. We had that not long ago in the Gemara. From the way he speaks, you're able to learn halachot. Everything is halacha. That's how we learn halacha, is understanding how they live. Halakha means living. It means the way you walk. It means the way you go. It means your way of life, your way of operating. And for a Rabban Gamliel to be able to say there's no word that comes out of his mouth isn't divrei Torah. Ein meshivin b'merchatz is not coming from him, is not just a matter of appropriateness coming from him. It is a psak halakha, and he wouldn't have said it in a place that you're not allowed to say words of Torah.